Welcome. I'm Mike Schachter, the president of the Carolina Nature Coalition. Our mission is to raise public awareness of environmental issues and environmental justice, and to engage citizens in meaningful community action. Getting away from fossil fuels is an important step in mitigating climate change. Our presenter this evening, Joel Dunn, who I have known for several years as my go-to guru for electrification and as an advocate of solar and electric vehicles, both personally and publicly. I want to thank Tom Shoup, our secretary, for organizing this event, and he will now introduce Joel Dunn. Tom.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, I'm Tom Shoup, Secretary for the Carolina Nature Coalition. Today, we continue to see the global climate crisis as the #1 existential threat. One of the most promising steps we can take is to move to gas-powered vehicles, from gas-powered vehicles to electric. In a recent poll, it was found 55% of North Carolinians would consider buying a fully electric vehicle. So we are faced with a major shift in our thinking. How will that work? Are there enough charging stations? How long will this car go on a single charge? What will it cost? To help us with this, we have asked our speaker today to explain this new reality. Joel Dunn is the current president of the Croatan chapter of the Sierra Club and secretary of the board of Coastal Carolina Riverwatch. He is a North Carolinian raised in Eastern North Carolina. In his professional career, he was a software engineer, both in the private sector and the University of North Carolina, and taught at UNC Chapel Hill for 20 years. He has been interested in renewable energy and electric vehicles for several years and has solar plus battery storage systems on his house since 2018. Joel has been driving EVs since 2016, and he and his wife have broken the chain to the gas pump by having a total electric household. Now, I'm very happy to introduce Joel and his wife, Jan.
Yeah. What is an EV? Yeah. Why might you want one? Challenges? Yeah. What are the benefits? What are the challenges? And for you, is it going to work for you at this point in time? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a number of things. I'm going to give you an outline here in a minute. But before I do that, just a couple more things about me. So I am not an electrical engineer. I'm a computer guy. All right. But because everything is software driven these days, that actually works pretty well. Occasionally, I have to talk to my electrical engineering friends to help translate some things. But if you hang out around EVs and solar energy long enough, you pick up a lot of things. And one of the things that we're going to do in a few minutes is go through a taxonomy of the vocabularies and things that will be helpful to you as you try to parse out how that EV might fit in your lifestyle. So, as Tom said, it's been a journey. We're an EV-only household, except for the boat. Okay, boats is an area where electrification is still very much a work in progress. All right, but that's the only time I go to the gas pump now is when I have to fill up the boat. All right, but it gets 2 miles a gallon, so I have to make up for it some other way. So we currently have a 2020 Chevy Bolt, which is out here in the parking lot. That's what we drove tonight. I also have a 2022 Rivian pickup truck, and the bumper sticker on both the truck and the car says, "My house powers my car." And it really does, because we take that solar energy And we provide power to the vehicles, and we provide power to the house. And we have generated, over the past several years, we've generated about 2/3 of the power that we use for the house and charging the cars at home. So it really can make a difference. So let's get started. So this is what we're going to do for our outline. All right. When Tom and Michael talked to me about this, they had some things that they wanted me to be sure to address. I had some ideas about things that I wanted to talk through as well. But as I mentioned, we're going to go through taxonomy and vocabulary. We're going to talk about the benefits and challenges. Then there's some questions about socioeconomic impact. All right. And this is something that there are some real questions and challenges around right now, and environmental questions. And I'm going to try to provide answers for some of those environmental questions. And frankly, it's a little easier to provide answers for some of the environmental questions than the socioeconomic questions. Okay. Also, there were questions about what is the government doing? What can the government do? And then ultimately, what can you do? Because as Tom said, this is really becoming an existential problem, and the issue of climate change. And this is one of the major ways that we can work to try to address that through electrification of transportation. So there's not going to be a test after the next 3 slides. So you can take notes if you want, but I'm not going to ask anything. All right. So that we can have a conversation, we have to talk about some abbreviations and acronyms. So we usually don't talk about gasoline-powered cars. They are ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine. All right? Now, but that's the easy part, because when you get to electric vehicles, there are different types. There's what's called a hybrid or a mild hybrid. All right, and that's like Michael's Prius sitting out here in the parking lot right now. Okay, it has a battery, right? And that battery captures energy through regenerative braking, but it doesn't have a place where you can plug anything into it. You can't dump power into it from the grid. Then there's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, PHEV, plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So it has a battery that can be charged from utility power. It can capture energy through regenerative braking, okay? But it also has a gasoline engine. So our Jan and I have two sons. One lives in Northern Virginia. There'll be a little bit more on that later. But he and his wife have a plug-in hybrid minivan, a Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid minivan, and it works very, very well for them, okay? And they put gas into it about maybe once every 3 months or so, because they run on battery power most of the time. Then the next level is battery electric vehicles, BEVs. All right, nothing but a battery and electric motors. All right, no gasoline backup. PHEV has gasoline backup. BEV, no gasoline backup. All right, now, so we've got that down, the different kinds of vehicles. Then we need to get a couple of other electrical terms down. Kilowatt. All right, a kilowatt is 1,000 watts of electrical power. 1 watt, kilowatt. Then, importantly, is a kilowatt hour. And a kilowatt hour is a kilowatt of power used for 1 hour. Okay, and what you'll find is that battery storage is rated in kilowatt hours. Charging speeds of vehicles are talked about in terms of kilowatts. Right? Now, so let's bring this kind of back home. Okay, everybody remembers, I can tell, looking out at the audience here, everybody remembers incandescent light bulbs. We've all gone LED now, okay, or at least I hope you've gone LED. But take a 100-watt light bulb, all right, tremendously inefficient thing. 13-watt LED will do that same work now. But, and this is going to be a good example, that 100-watt bulb, if you leave it on for 10 hours, that consumes a kilowatt hour of power. Make sense? All right. 100 watts times 10 hours is a kilowatt hour. All right. That LED bulb consumes much less. A little bit, it consumes about 15%, 13% actually, of the power. So, all right. And as you think about EVs and think about battery capacity and things like that, it's a good thing to have at least some of these basic electrical concepts in mind. Okay. Now, so I mentioned batteries. All right, and this is another area where we've got to have a little bit of technical discussion here, and we're not. And believe me, this slide could have been about 14 or 20 slides. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you could put in here. So the first thing that we're going to cover is the lithium-ion battery, Li, lithium, all right, O-N, all right, lion, all right. Lithium-ion battery is the battery that is used in your cell phone, it's in your laptop, and it's in a lot of cars today. Probably about 2/3 of the electric cars that are out there use standard lithium-ion batteries. Okay, now they're sensitive to charge cycles and state of charge. But there's some things that it gets a little more complicated because lithium-ion batteries come in a couple of flavors. The one that we usually see is this one called NMC. That's nickel, manganese, and cobalt. More about cobalt later, all right? Because you guys probably know that cobalt has a little bit of some challenges around the procurement of that. Okay, so the NMC battery, lithium-ion, is what most of the lithium-ion batteries that you're familiar with today use. There's another one called nickel, cobalt, and aluminum. It's a little bit cheaper, right? But most of the ones that are out there that we normally see are the NMC. Then there's the LFP, and technically that's the lithium iron, Li-Fe for iron, remember your chemistry, okay? And then phosphate, right? So lithium iron phosphate contains no cobalt. Deployment is growing rapidly, right? Tesla's using the lithium iron phosphate battery in its standard range electric cars, and a number of Chinese companies are using lithium iron phosphate batteries. I didn't put this in the slides, but where are there more electric cars than any place else in the world? China. All right? They make them and drive them. More electric cars there than any other place in the world, by a long shot. Okay. All right. So the Chinese are deploying that at scale, and as I said, Tesla's using that at scale. Lower energy density, okay, but it's cheaper. All right. And cheaper means it might make those EVs a little bit more accessible, which is hitting at some of the socioeconomic challenges that we've alluded to. So also the LFP batteries have a little better projected longevity, and they're also much more tolerant of charging to 100% state of charge. So that's another acronym that we'll use, SOC, state of charge. Is the battery at 20% of capacity? Is it at 80%? Is it at 100%? Okay, so lithium-ion, all right, lithium iron phosphate. Okay, and if you go into the marketplace to look for a car, this is a question that you might ask of the dealer or company that's selling that. What kind of battery do I have in this vehicle? And you can make some determinations from that. All right, now, so we've got a battery, and now we have to charge it. Okay, this is another level, or another area where we need to get some common ground rules here so that we understand what these different types of chargers are. So the simplest one is take one of these outlets like this. You can plug a charger in. It's called a level 1 charger. Charges at 120 volts, your standard wall current, but it charges very slowly. It charges at the rate of 1 kilowatt, roughly, per hour, or 1 kilowatt hour in an hour. So if I have a battery in my car that is a 60 kilowatt hour battery, and that's a fairly common size, then it would take 60 hours, or about 2.5 days, to charge it up. Okay? That works for some people. Depends on how much you drive. All right? And you can plug it in any 120 volt outlet. Okay. All right. Now, however, there are two more options here. All right. The next is level 1, level 2. All right. The level 2 charger, 240 volts. All right. So to sort of bring this back to thinking about appliances and things like that you may have in your home today, think about your dryer outlet. Think about an electric stove. Right? Those things use 240 volts. Right? And because they use 240 volts, they're able to charge much faster, from as low as about 6 kilowatts per hour to as much as about 20 kilowatts per hour. Now here, how many kilowatts per hour you get on 240 volt depends upon the amperage of the connection. All right. So, and we're not going to get too far down that rabbit hole because there's a lot we could talk about there. But just suffice it to say that you can charge between about 6 and 20 kilowatts. So that same battery that is a 60 kilowatt hour battery could be charged somewhere between 10 hours and 3 hours. And this is something that you would have theoretically at your home. Okay. All right, we have one at home that will charge between 6 kilowatts and 10 kilowatts, and that's what we use to charge our electric cars. Then there's level 3. All right. And the level 3 is actually a very different beast. All right. It does not take alternating current, but it actually takes direct and puts direct current, DC, directly into the battery. All right. And it can go in much faster, starting at a rate of maybe 50 kilowatts per hour up to 350 kilowatts per hour. And the technology is moving beyond that. So what that means is on a high-speed charger at 350 kilowatts per hour, then you would be able to take and charge that 60 kilowatt hour battery in about 10 minutes. Okay? Now, all things are not equal. There's a lot of technical ifs and buts. All right? And there are things like environmental ifs and buts, like temperature and so on like that. Okay? But just if people talk about level 1, level 2, level 3, level 1 is just a standard wall outlet. Level 2 is something like a dryer at your house. All right. Level 3 is like a gas station along the road. And this is what you use. The level 3 stations are what you use when you're actually traveling on the interstate and need to stop to put electricity into your battery. Okay. So plugs. All right. So the J1772 is a standard plug, and this is used for many cars that for both the level 1 connection, the 120 volt connection, and the 240 volt connection. The one in the middle is for Tesla, level 1, level 2, and level 3. Tesla did this first. All right. They created their way to do it. But the standards that have emerged since Tesla has done that are the J1772 and then this other one, which is the CCS, or Combined Charging System, which combines a J1772 with a couple of additional high energy plugs that allow it to do that DC fast charging. Okay. All right. So, and one of the things that you may have heard about is that Tesla is working on opening their supercharger network to vehicles other than Tesla. And to do that, they actually have to have a physical adapter on the station that allows it to do that. Tesla cars can also charge at other stations using adapters. Okay, but the common types of plugs that are out there right now are J1772, Tesla, and the combined charging system. There's another one that was in, if you or anyone else had a Nissan Leaf, it uses a connection that is an acronym that we say CHAdeMO, CHADEMO, and it's an acronym from French, and that's a different charging style, but that's going away because Nissan is moving away from that, and they were really the only ones who did that at scale. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, and you see why I said there wasn't going to be a test at the end of this? Okay, all right, good. Okay, now let's talk about EVs. Okay, why are they good? They're fun to drive, all right? I mean, great performance. So my Rivian truck weighs 7,500 pounds, okay? All right. It can do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, but she won't let me do it. So you have more torque and acceleration in an EV than anything other than a high-end gas sports car. I mean, if you've ever driven, a really high-end gasoline-powered car, well, that's the acceleration that you get from the ordinary garden variety EV. All right. So the other good thing about them is very low schedule maintenance. No oil changes, right? You don't have oil, right? No tune-ups, no spark plugs, okay? Right? So no transmission maintenance. You don't have a transmission, at least not in the way that we think of it in terms of an ICE transmission. And you have very little brake maintenance. You might look at me and say, why do you have very little brake maintenance? Remember that thing I was saying about regenerative braking? All right, so when you stop, what you're doing is, as you let up off the accelerator, the vehicle is going to use the motors, and it's going to capture that electricity. And as it captures that electricity, it actually slows the vehicle down, and it can do so very, very quickly. So, for example, we drove up here in the Bolt from Emerald Isle. I never touched the brake. All right, so that's why you don't have as much brake maintenance. And there are fewer moving parts in the engine and drivetrain. All this is to say that there is very little schedule maintenance on an EV. Okay? So that's something that you can think about as you look at the whole cost equation of an electric vehicle. What else is good? They're very quiet. They actually make a noise so that pedestrians can hear them. If it's going below about 15 miles an hour, they make this little squawky kind of noise so that you know that there's a car coming. All right, above 15 miles an hour, there's enough road noise from the tires and everything like that. The people can hear them. Okay? But they're so much quieter than ICE cars when they're going slow that they actually are required by law to make noise so that you can hear them. All right, they're good for the environment. We're going to drill in on that a lot more later. All right, and fuel economy. And fuel economy is such a sort of complicated area that I wanted to give it its own slide. So, fueling economy is complicated. All right, so just like we were talking about different levels of charging, there are different ways that charging is priced. So we are here in Carteret County, Craven County, all right, that you have a combination of different entities that provide your electricity. If you live in the city of New Bern, it might be the City of New Bern Electric. If you live out, it might be Carteret Craven Electric Co-op. It might be Duke Power in some areas. All right, and all of these have different rules, regulations, and sets of tariffs. But my electricity from Carteret Craven, the standard rate is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. It varies a little bit from summer to winter. Okay, now. So if you think about this, and again, this is sort of toward the economy. All right, my boat gets about 4 miles per kilowatt hour, although driving up here from Emerald Isle, it actually got 4.5 miles per kilowatt hour, so it actually did a little bit better. But if you do the math on that, then that means that it costs 2.5 cents to drive it a mile. All right, so moving on a little bit further, the Rivian, my pickup truck, gets about 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour. It costs 4 cents to drive it for a mile. All right, now, so I'm going to skip down, I'm going to skip the second bullet and go down the gasoline comparison. So if you buy gas, $3.50 a gallon, if your car gets 35 miles a gallon, it costs about 10 cents a mile. Okay, all right. So that's you can kind of compare this. So if you are fueling your EV at home, it can be dramatically cheaper. All right. And gas has to get really, really cheap, and it's probably not going to get cheap enough to make that at the same price level. Now, where it gets a little different is if you do not have a place to plug it in at home. If you're plugging it in at a public level 2 charger, that like some churches have those, some businesses have those, they typically are going to charge at a rate of about 6 kilowatts per hour, and they're going to charge you about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. All right, so that price is a little higher because they've got to maintain the equipment. Okay, now the public level 3 chargers that you would charge at on the interstate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, cost about 30 to 50 cents per kilowatt hour. So therefore, if I purely fuel the boat, right, on the level 3 charger, then it would cost maybe 7.5 cents to 12.5 cents per mile, whereas the internal combustion engine, $3.50 gas, 35 miles per gallon, 10 cents. So if you purely charge it only at the high-speed chargers, then you're going to maybe pay a little bit more than you would to fuel a gasoline vehicle. But remember, you don't have oil changes, you don't have a lot of other kinds of things that you have to do, okay? So, and again, so like I said, don't forget those operational costs. Now, let's move to some challenges. Okay. New things to understand. Yeah, we're all used to gasoline. We understand that. We understand miles per gallon. We understand where we can find gasoline everywhere. Okay, and gas pumps all are pretty standard, and they all pretty much work the same way. I mean, there's some differences, right? But pretty much you go to a gas pump and you know how it works, except for that time that I was in Italy and went to a self-service station and tried to figure out how to do this, and I didn't realize that you paid in one place and then you had to identify the pump that you were going to get your gas from, and you had to read the prompt in Italian so you could identify that. And needless to say, I ended up getting a €20 credit, and we went back the next day and found a friendly Italian who helped me fix it and get my fuel. So anyway, more lots of stories like that. But so it's different. And you look at a charger sometimes, there are two cables on it. Only one of them can be used at the same time. There's all kinds of things like that that you just have to learn as a part of this transition. All right, range anxiety is a big thing. And there's going to be more on that on the next slide. And with trucks, towing range. All right, so I traded a Silverado for my Rivian, and with Silverado, I'd get about 20 miles a gallon. If I put a trailer behind it, I'd get about 10 miles a gallon. Okay? All right, same thing happens with an EV truck. I have 350 mile range with the Rivian. Put a trailer behind it, I got 175 mile range. All right? So, it's a little bit of an issue when you start trying to pull large trailers for distances. Now, fortunately, I only live a mile from the boat ramp, so it's not a big deal for me. And I can even pull it down to Beaufort pretty easily, too. So let's, the other things, as I mentioned before, the different types of charging and the fact that the costs can be higher. And again, this is where, when we start thinking about some of the socioeconomic impacts of EVs, people who can't charge at home are the ones who are going to pay more. And those are probably going to be some of the same people who may have less disposable income to pay for that anyway. So they're not going to be reaping all the benefits. But hopefully we're going to see some changes coming there. Now, so range anxiety. All right, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD. And a lot of this is propaganda pushed by the fossil fuel lobbies and those with political agendas, because you see all these memes on Facebook, okay? And there's a lot of stuff out there that's just not true. And what you have to do is you have to go through and you have to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and make sure that you understand what is there a kernel of truth here, and what is it, and what can you do about it. So range anxiety is real, but it's manageable. The range that your car is going to show is generally the range delivered. Your car is going to tell you how many miles you had. When we left to come here, the Bolt said, you've got 191 miles of range. It wasn't full. It said you got 191 miles of range. So we said, it's about 40 miles from Emerald Isle here and 40 miles back. Hey, we're fine. All right. So we don't have to have it full. Do you fill up your car every day, your gasoline car? Or do you just put the gas in there based on how much you're going to use the next day? All right. Some people fill up. It's just the way they've always done it. And some people say, hey, I'm going to put in $20, all right, and I'm going to do it that way. All right. Now, the next thing, as you think through range anxiety, is how often do you really, honestly, drive 250 miles or more in a day? Really, honestly, truthfully, without needing to stop? Not very often. All right. And if you really have a case where you need to take long drives, where you don't want to stop, where you can't afford the time to charge, even if that time to charge is pretty quick, then you can still have an EV, but then just rent an internal combustion car, an ICE car, for those trips where you can't make an EV work as well. So, also, speed. Speed dramatically cuts your range. Drive the speed limit. If you're someone who likes to drive 80 miles an hour on the interstate, an EV might not be the one for you. Because you're going to end up with a lot less range than is predicted by the manufacturer of that car. But you know what? The same thing happens with an internal combustion car. They lose a lot of range at speed. It's just that you don't worry about it because you can buy gasoline everywhere. Okay. Now, another thing is cold weather affects range. One of the first things is that heat is a waste product in an internal combustion engine car. All right, so, turn on the heat when you get cold. Well, that's because, and this is one of the things, it's not on one of my slides, but an internal combustion car takes and uses about 20 to 25% of the energy in that gallon of gasoline. The rest of it is lost in friction and heat. The EV converts about 75 to 80% of that kilowatt of electricity into motive force. Right? So it's a big difference in efficiency. So heat's a waste product. On a battery electric vehicle, heat comes from your battery. So if you want to heat up that whole cabin, then it's going to take more power and your range is going to be less. So use seat heaters, use the heated steering wheel, all right? Maybe put on a sweater, okay? All right? Now, new vehicles also are moving to heat pumps to try to make sure that the impact is less than resistive heater, which is the type of heater that, we used to use electric resistance heaters in our homes, back in the day. Move to heat pumps. Heat pumps are much more efficient. Same thing happens in cars. All right. Now, another thing that's interesting is wind, a headwind, rain, wet roads, rough pavement can significantly reduce range, 10 to 15%. Same thing happens with an ICE car, all right? Except you just don't care about it because you can buy gasoline anywhere, all right? So a lot of this is, you just have to think about this in a different way. You have to plan. You have to manage the expectations. And again, towing doesn't work. So a little case study. So driving from Emerald Isle to Centerville, Virginia, we about once a month, we do this to go see the grandkids. All right. So that's why we go every month. All right. Grandma has to go see the grandkids. So we leave Emerald Isle, drive to Richmond with the Rivian. It's about 250 miles. I usually have about 100 miles of range left when I get there. There are 8 stations in the Walmart parking lot close to I-95. We use the restroom, let the dogs out to do their business, and by the time we're finished with all that, which takes about 20 minutes by the time you go to the bathroom and let the dogs out, then we've got enough charge to make it up to Centerville, which is where we're headed. Right. We actually had just about enough to get there, but we would have gotten there with like 0 in the battery. And my son and his wife had 2 level 2 chargers in their garage, so we charged there when we arrived. And then coming back, then we charge in Rocky Mount, and again, for about 20 minutes or until we finish our which sandwich. All right? And sometimes that takes a little bit longer. They're kind of messy, So it's more like 30, 35 minutes. There are 4 charging stations at a Sheetz, but we like the which across the street better than the food at Sheetz. Right. And typically we only need 15, 20 minutes of charge to get home, but as I said, it takes a while to eat that sandwich. Now, so let's talk about some of the other things. Going to socioeconomic impact. So EVs are approaching cost parity, especially if you consider the amount of amount of maintenance that you don't have with the EV that you have with the internal combustion engine car. So this is a very busy slide. I don't expect you to read this whole thing, but the point is that it was an article in the Wall Street Journal saying that EVs are shattering the barrier to adoption that matters most, and that's cost. All right, so when the Wall Street Journal starts saying things like that, think about that from a cost standpoint. Now, early EVs were largely luxury vehicles with high margins. All right. Early Teslas, the Model S, the Model X. All right. The Model 3 was Tesla's first reasonably affordable car, but it was still about $50,000 more. All right. So that's why we didn't have one until Chevy came out with a Bolt. So we bought a Chevy Bolt. So, but remember, the thing is that the changes are happening in the industry, and you can find new EVs now for under $30,000 before the tax credits. All cars are pretty expensive now because the manufacturers are bundling all these options together. So, I mean, you go try to find a car for less than $30,000, and there are a whole lot out there right now. So, the Inflation Reduction Act brought in a $4,000 tax credit for sales of used EVs. And I think that's going to be something that really helps to begin to bridge this gap, because you're starting to see more EVs now, more used EVs coming onto the marketplace, and that tax credit is going to be a very important thing, although you do have to have that tax liability for the tax credit to work. It's not a payment. It is a tax credit. And again, as we've touched on a couple of times, a barrier is where to charge it if you don't have a home where you can plug it in. On-street charging is beginning to roll out in cities, things like lamppost charging, areas where if you've got a power distribution system along the street, putting chargers out. But that's something where it's still a work in progress. Also, apartments and townhomes is still a challenge there. And what we're going to, I think, eventually see is we're going to see wiring put at some of the parking spaces in there with lock cabinets and things like that, so that the owner or whoever's allocated to that space will be able to charge at that space. So again, this is something that as we get more EVs out there, we're going to see more movement in addressing some of these issues, but it is a real issue today, and that's something that I think that we need to be cognizant of. Right. Charging at work can also can help as well. If you have the kind of job where you're going to have chargers at your workplace. I mean, even if you drive through Jones County at the school there in Jones County, they've got like 3 EV chargers sitting in front of the school. It's hard to see it if you don't go out there on a weekend when there's nobody there. But schools, businesses, and things like that are beginning to roll out charging. Okay, now. Let's talk about a couple of things with the environmental impact. So, what about that coal-powered EV? You ever seen a Facebook meme? Somebody showed a picture of an EV, connected by wires over to a coal-powered power plant. Well, you haven't been on Facebook enough if you haven't seen it. So, it is true that producing an EV, manufacturing an EV, creates more greenhouse gas than an internal combustion engine car. That is true. However, the lifetime emissions are less and getting much less as the power mix moves from carbon intensive to non-carbon intensive. So an EV sedan is greenhouse gas positive at about 8,400 miles if you run it on 100% renewable power. That means the extra carbon that is emitted from manufacturing it, if you drive 8,400 miles on 100% renewable power, all right, then you're even. 13,500 miles on the current U.S. power grid mix. So if you buy a car, an EV, you drive it 13,500 miles, about a year maybe, because a lot of people drive about 1,000 miles a month or so. Drive it about a year, then you're going to have met that debt of the additional greenhouse gas that was produced by manufacturing that vehicle. So, and the grid is getting cleaner. All right, and I'm going to show you a slide on that. If you run it on 100% coal-fired grid, if you ran your car 79,000 miles, it would be better, even if you ran it on a 100% coal-fired grid. Okay, and again, that's because of the efficiency of EVs. So here's the U.S. power grid. So the renewables, are the green, and you see that green is getting bigger. And one other thing to notice, see it's actually kind of capped out a little bit. All right, so we are not generating a lot more power now than we were 20 years ago. All right, and what's happening is that coal, this brown, is dramatically going down. All right, that's the worst from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint. Nuclear has stayed the same since the 70s, pretty much, or the 1980s. What's happened is that natural gas has expanded to fill that gap. All right, and it's less bad than coal, but not as good as we'd like it to be. All right, but again, the rollout of solar and wind is really helping us to continue to green the power grid. And unlike gasoline, the greener the grid gets, the greener your car gets. All right, and you can kind of look at that here with this graph of the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of a mid-sized battery electric vehicle. All right, so you see that it's kind of, the colors don't, actually they show up better there than they show up on the monitor here. The manufacturing is the blue at the bottom. Then the darker blue is the, well, actually, is that? Yeah, again, it didn't translate very well. But that dark band right above the blue is battery assembly. And then the batteries themselves, mining the minerals, is the brighter green. And then that orange at the top is the carbon footprint of the electricity that moves the car compared to the lifetime emissions of the ICE car and the gasoline. And again, the point here is the more you drive an EV, the greener it gets. And the more we green the grid, the greener an EV gets. All right, I said cobalt earlier in the presentation. What about mineral extraction? The world cobalt supply has really increased dramatically. And this is mostly from the large industrial mines and the things that you've seen about the quote-unquote artisanal mines in the Congo where they use child labor to go down in the holes and dig up that. Yes, that did happen, but the manufacturers, the battery manufacturers now are really spurning that. They know that is not going to fly, and the cobalt that is on the market right now, again, is responsibly sourced in most cases. I mean, I'm not going to say everybody does, but there's a big push to responsibly source it. All right, and again, to get it from large producers rather than the kid in a hole in the Congo. Okay, lithium reserves. Lithium reserves are large and growing. Chile, Argentina, Australia, China, U.S. Did you know that North Carolina once was the largest lithium producer in the world? All right, that was when it was medicinal lithium. All right, that was not for EVs. That was a long time ago. All right, but there's an area down near Kings Mountain, and there's an outfit called Piedmont Lithium that actually has a contract with Tesla to mine lithium and to send it to Tesla to build batteries. So lithium here in North Carolina. So I think that the folks here are going to make the slides available. Is that correct? Yeah. So a lot of links that I have in here so that you can check some of the things that I did, but also this article right here has a lot of good links about debunking some of the common anti-EV myths around mineral sourcing, and some just good things to read there. Now, we've covered a lot of territory, but how long is my battery going to last? I'm afraid it's going to give out. All right. Well, a long time. All EV batteries are warranted to last at least 8 years or 100,000 miles. Okay, most motors that you in an internal combustion car don't have that much of a warranty, but some manufacturers warrant for much longer, and we're beginning to see a lot of longitudinal experience on this because we've got Teslas that have been on the road now 10, 12 years. So because they were the early to the game. And 300, 500,000 miles from some battery packs. All right. Now, so the warranty is for capacity loss of no more than a defined percentage. So what happens is that over time, generally the battery doesn't give out. Okay. What happens is the battery, just like the battery in your cell phone or your laptop, gradually it doesn't last as long as it used to. Well, that's what's happening with EVs, that it gradually doesn't last as long as it used to. And the warranty is usually for a loss of no more than 20 or 30%. But the longitudinal studies are showing in many cases that the loss is more like 10% at 100,000 miles or more. So what we're seeing is that battery life is a lot better than has been expected. And the predictive modeling that the federal government has done says that a battery should last 12 to 15 years in a moderate climate like what we have. Okay. Less if you're in a cold climate. And battery technology is moving so quickly right now, new chemistries, new ways of manufacturing it, that by the time we get there are going to be lots and lots of options out there. Okay. And how long is your engine and transmission going to last, and what would it cost you if you had to put another engine in your car? You know, I mean, that's, you know, people say, I'm scared of putting in a battery, but you might have to put in an engine. Okay, that's a problem too. Now, so battery longevity. Another thing, recycling. All right, because people look at this and say, well, what about these materials? Okay, well, there are a couple of things here. Before I talk about the battery recycling, I mean, a car is a car. All right, so junkyards. You know, man, we got you drive around the roads around here. I mean, you see cars stacked up. Yeah, a lot of them are not getting recycled. I mean, they just sit there and they rust away. All right, so that is not just an EV problem. What's unique about the EVs is the battery. All right, so what are we going to do there? So similar to solar panel recycling, right, the technology is available to do a lot of good things with recycling, but without a critical mass of the raw materials, the business model is not yet working. And we don't have, part of the problem is we don't have a lot of end-of-life batteries out there right now. However, this company called Redwood Materials just completed the first year of a recycling pilot, and they were able to recoup 95% of the lithium, cobalt, nickel, and copper, and some other materials from over 1,200 battery packs that they processed for recycling. And there's going to be a lot of demand for this because the Inflation Reduction Act says that battery material sourcing is something that we're trying to bring back domestically. And if a mineral was mined in a foreign place but was recycled domestically, then it becomes a domestic material. All right. So the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be a big help in that. So reuse. And I'm just about finished because I realize I've been talking so much and having a good time that I've used up a lot of time here. But EV battery packs are made up. It's not just one giant battery. They're made up of a lot of things that look like those big old D cells that you used to put in your flashlights. Okay, so it's like hundreds of them that are stacked together. But those things can be taken apart and they can be put back together in different ways and reused. And there are actually companies that have been able to reuse and resell a large percentage of the batteries that they've received. Right. And also you have companies that are actually creating energy storage systems. One of them is online now in California that was made from the battery packs of Nissan Leaf vehicles, which is one of the first EVs to come to the market. It's actually online now in California helping to balance the grid because it doesn't have to have as much capacity. You know, the fact that it's lost maybe 10, 20, 30% of its capacity, it really doesn't hurt it in the energy storage because you just add another pack of them, right? You don't have to haul it around like you do in a car. So good articles here on recycling and reuse. But again, think about reuse, and then at the end of reuse, that's when you recycle. All right? Government, I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act a couple of times. It's just really hard to understate the impact of that legislation because not only for the credits, but also bringing sourcing and manufacturing back domestically. Governments, local, state, and federal, leading by example, not only with incentives, but fleet purchasing. All right. So the post office is going to have a whole lot more EVs after the feds gave them more money, and a lot of people really gave them a lot of grief about not buying EVs. But something like the post office, something like delivery vehicles, anything where you have a well-defined route that you know how far that vehicle is going to go in a day, perfect for an EV. So the government can really lead by examples there. And then finally, what can you do? Make the next vehicle you buy an EV. There's going to be some adaptation and growing pains as you go forward, but it really does work and it sets an example. And the thing is, if we can't convince folks like you to go out and buy an EV, how are we going to convince people who are really skeptical about this to do that? So vote with your dollars and buy EVs. And thank you. And sorry I ran on as long as I did, but we'll still be here for questions.
Great. I'm going to come by with a microphone so that the people online can hear. So raise your hand if you have a question, and then I'll bring the microphone to you.
Two questions. Does Chevy or GM still make the Volt? And secondly, charging stations at home, if they sell you a car, do they provide the charging station as well?
Okay, good questions. Chevy is still making the Bolt. There's a Chevy Volt and a Bolt. The Volt was a plug-in hybrid. The Bolt is a battery electric, and yes, Chevy is still making that. It's an older architecture, but they're still planning to make 75 or 100,000 of them this year. All right, the second question is the charging station. So generally what you have in your home is you have a plug it's called a NEMA 1450. It's a 240 volt plug that can handle up to up to 50 amps of power. All right, and then what you have a dedicated circuit that you run to that. So you have a plug. Now, some EVs come with a charger. For some, you have to buy the charger. It just depends on the EV. Basically, the more you pay for it, the more likely you are to get a charger with it. Sometimes you may want to buy a different charger because a different charger may give you additional capabilities, such as the ability to control it remotely, to connect it to your network, and to be able to manage it. So.
Yeah, two questions. Yeah, I think I heard you say 250 miles for electrical vehicle. Is that, first question, is that the average from what is being sold today? Or is that what you get always? And the second question is, so many of us in this area, or some of us in this area, do go to Raleigh for doctor visits, for ball games, mm-hmm. and you come back the same day. Mm-hmm. It'd be very tempting to get the EV strictly and see if you can make it, But what happens and how many people are running out of electricity and got to get somebody to tow them? I mean, what about that story?
Okay. All right. So several questions there. Okay. So 250 miles, that was just, I was just pulling up a number there. So 250 miles is roughly the projected range for my Bolt that's sitting out here in the parking lot. Actually, they say 259. My Rivian gets 350 miles. Okay, and we are seeing, though, there's a trade-off there, because the more range you have, the more expensive the battery is, therefore the more expensive the vehicle is. So what the manufacturers are trying to do is to figure out sort of the sweet spot of how much range do people really want to pay for, and sometimes they will offer the car in different battery sizes so that you can make that choice. Now, about driving to Raleigh, if you're how far is it from New Bern to Raleigh? 2 hours or so. So maybe what is it? 200? Is it 100 miles? 100? About 100 miles. I'd be nervous about 250. Okay. Well, 200. Okay, so 200. If it's 200 miles, you would have that would work unless it was a cold, wet, rainy day. Now, however, there are many fast charging stations in Raleigh, and what you can do is you can stop for 20, 30 minutes and put plenty of power in and come on home. Would I be happier maybe to get a gas combination electric? It just depends. So the question was, would he be happier getting a plug-in hybrid? As I have often said, plug-in hybrid is kind of the gateway drug in EVs. If you're really nervous, then you'll get a lot of the benefits, because you'll typically have a 30-40 mile range on your all electric. so you can run around town and do a lot of things, and then it'll switch over to gas when you're on the road. So so it just depends. If you want to learn the BEV, there's no problems with driving an EV from here to Raleigh and then coming back. If you do have enough range, or just charging if you feel like that you need that extra range.
I wanted to say a funny story about a plug-in hybrid. My brother has a plug-in hybrid, and he uses mostly the electric. So he only used a liter of gas for almost a year. Now, the car now is going to make him use gas because gas gets stale. And so he was
That's right.
telling me that now his car is going to make him use gas and
Yeah.
make him. So that's pretty funny.
That is the way it works. All right. So this is my wife Jan now on the mic.
I want to respond to the question about, in an EV, when it says you have 25 miles, you have 25 miles. There is no, oh my God, it's not like when you drive an ICE car and that light comes on and says put fuel in it. Do you have 50-mile range? Do you have 40-mile range? What is your range? In an EV, when it says you've got 25 more miles, you have a full 25 miles. Now, have I not experienced range anxiety? 2 times. I remember 2 major times that I really did. The first day we got it, I thought we weren't going to get home. And the second time is he pushed it one time, and when we got to the charging station, it said there was 7% left in the battery. And I was like this, going down I-95. But it's definitive.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and the last part of your question was, what happens if you run out? They actually, there are services now that will bring a stack of batteries in a truck to you, and then to give you a faster, well, not give you, sell you a fast charge there. So, and services you can subscribe to, and AAA is moving to start offering this kind of thing as well. So, so you don't have to get towed, but you might have to get a virtual gas can delivered to you.
So on that AAA point, AAA did get set up for the EVs,
I'm not.
and then they messed it up. So I got 2 questions now, I suppose. The first one was, you've been driving EVs for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever gotten to a charging station and found that you couldn't charge? I get that it's a 10 to 20 minute charging time, but sometimes if with all of the cars now being bought, they're EV, are you in the slightest bit concerned about being able to access those EV points?
So, so the question is, have I ever worried about not being able to charge because I'd have to wait in line? And you know, the possibility exists. To this date, we have not had to wait in line for a station. A couple of times I have gotten a station that was charging at a lower rate than what I wanted to charge at. Okay, but I still got a charge. And a couple of times there, I've actually started to charge at one station, and then when the faster one freed up, then I have then moved over to that one.
I got
So,
told to come up here and stand next to
okay,
you. They
all
wouldn't
right.
see the height difference, I
Okay,
guess.
all right. Yeah.
Oh, wait a second. They can't hear you.
So to the point that was made, one of the concerns I have, you mentioned the towing things. So you're saying a 25-mile range is a 25-mile range. Okay, if I'm in North Carolina and I'm around here where it's nice and flat, or if I'm in Colorado and I'm just about to go up 3,000 feet, am I still going to get that 25 miles?
Well,
Because I'm pretty sure I'm not.
yeah, no, you're actually not. However, if you go 10 miles up the hill, then when you crest the hill and start going down, you may get 20 back. Yeah. Right. So there is no perpetual motion. So yeah.
Yes, I seen the commercials with Domino's cars that they supposed to be going green. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Pizza delivery is something just it makes a lot of sense.
How much does it cost to charge at a charging station, and how are you finding the charging station, and how do you find the
Okay.
charging station?
So, so let me, actually, I had a slide back over here.
There's an app.
Yeah.
There's an
So-
app. And we went to visit our son this past weekend. And not only that, but Joel would say, he's driving, he said, look over there and look up this station that we think we'll start at, and be sure that all the chargers are working, or how many of the chargers are working.
To your point.
Because it could be going through maintenance. Or it could be that when we get there, 6 out of 8 are in use. So sometimes we were trying to make a decision coming back. It was raining on Sunday. And trying to figure out where we're going to stop and charge. We're going to try to do it before
Because we didn't want to put wet dogs back in the car.
So we actually stopped earlier to be sure we would be in front of the rain, to let the dogs walk, and we charged. But there's an app.
Yeah, and in terms of the price, so I brought this slide back up. The level 3 chargers, which are the highway chargers, typically run between 30 and 50 cents. Newbern really likes the one fast charger that they have, the town of Newbern, and I actually sent them an email about that. They charge 68 cents per kilowatt hour. And I said, you don't want anybody to use this, do you? And that was like, well, we don't want to lose any money on it. It's like, well, okay, well, then why'd you do it in the first place? But so Newbern does that. Now, there are other fast charge stations around. Believe it or not, there are 2 separate fast charge stations in Kinston. You know, I mean, it's like, I was surprised. There's one that's actually free. It's a slow one, 50 kilowatts, but there's a 150 kilowatt station that's at the Piggly Wiggly, just out. It's actually out where I think the new run for I-42 is going to be. I think they're thinking ahead. So, but there are a growing number of charging stations around eastern North Carolina.
There's charging stations behind Smithfield
Yes,
Here.
yeah. I've used the Smithfield charging station several times.
and the hospital.
Actually, 2 questions. One's frivolous and one is serious. The frivolous one is, what's a which sandwich?
So, which is a chain, a sandwich chain, like Jimmy John's or something?
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
And you know, the beauty of valve stems in a tire is that regardless of what car, what make, whatever, they're all the same. Do you see those 3 plugs at some point becoming standardized?
Yes.
So that
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, that's everything but Tesla is using the same. And Tesla actually uses the standard charger in Europe. So they just don't do it here. So just like Apple is being made to move toward USB-C chargers on iPads and things like that, yes, I think we're going to see the CCS standard become ubiquitous. I mean, it may take 6 or 8, 10 years to do that, but Tesla is actually retrofitting a number of the supercharger stations so that they will actually be able to support the standard CCS charging standard.
That's because they can't get any of the money from the Inflation Reduction Act unless they do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there are a couple EVs that are starting to come out with solar panels covering the car as well. Is that a fad, or is that actually worth waiting for? Kia's coming out with the EV9 in 2025, I think. And I think there's a Chinese car that's doing it currently.
So it's more a gimmick really than a something that really is going to help a lot. Now, if the whole car it has embedded solar, I mean, what I have read is that you might pick up if your car is parked in sunshine all day, you might pick up maybe 4, 5, 6 kilowatt hours of charge during the day. Let's say maybe 10% of a 60 kilowatt hour battery. So I mean, yes, you'll get some, okay. But how much do you pay for the solar charging? If you live out in the Australian boondocks and don't have electricity, hey, maybe it's a good thing. So I guess what I would say is I'm not convinced that it's going to be worth the cost.
Maybe you can talk a little bit more. Lithium, rare earth metals, there's no free lunch with that. I mean, there's been horrendous amounts of damage done to the environment because of that. So, and there's projections that by 2050, you're going to be in direct competition with other lithium users. It's not an infinite resource unless we start recycling.
Yeah. Well, I think we are going to start recycling. I think that's an important thing. And B, vis-a-vis the environmental degradation, I would say go look at the Athabascan tar sands. Go look at the Niger Delta. The extraction of oil is an extremely dirty business, and I think you have to be honest about the current status quo. We're used to gasoline. Gasoline extraction happens someplace else where we don't have to see it and worry about it. So, I mean, you're right. There's no free lunch on any of it. There's no free lunch on internal combustion cars either. The other thing that's often not computed in the amount of carbon emitted by internal combustion is the amount of carbon dioxide that is emitted during the production of oil, the transportation of oil. So yes, circling back around, the minerals themselves are somewhat finite. I mean, there's a lot of discussions about how much there actually is there. But yes, I think we're going to see it move to a circular economy with recapture of almost all of those materials, because somebody's going to be able to make a buck at it, and that's going to happen.
How much does a Bolt cost?
A Chevy Bolt right now, the standard Bolt, I think was 27.5, 26, somewhere in that. And then if you buy a new one, you can get a $7,500 tax credit on that if you have that tax liability.
One of the things he hasn't mentioned is, okay, so we are totally EV, but it was a process. We bought the first Bolt, and it was the first generation, and GM wanted to get all those. There was problems with the first ones, and that's why they gave us a really good deal to get the 2020. And then it was a leap of faith to get rid of the second one. But we spent one weekend doing a 900-mile trip with our granddaughter in the Rivian truck, no problem, charging. You just have to be proactive. You have to think about, going down the road right now, you look at your car and you're on I-95, and let's just take the next exit. There's bound to be gasoline within a mile, one direction or the other. But with a EV, you're sitting there, and often I'm looking at the app we know all the places between here and my son's house. But when we went up to Joy and Price Campground up near Boone to go camping, it was a little bit more, okay, we've got to figure out, you have to plan the trip more. It's kind of like if you're going to do a long road trip and you were going to go on a 4,000-mile road trip. You're figuring out how far you want to drive a day, what roads you want to take, where you're going to spend the night. You do a lot of planning.
Or are you going to spend the night at a place that has a charger where you can charge overnight at the hotel, for example?
You do have to spend more time planning your route and thinking about it.
Now, I heard that the state is going to put in charges on some of the main roads. What are some of the other things that the government is doing to encourage electric vehicles?
Well, I think going back to the Inflation Reduction Act, we're going to see a build out of probably over the next 3 or 4 years, another 500,000 charging stations, because they're, and what's happening here, each of the states has put forward a plan on where they're going to put them. And then they're getting the money, and then they're working with the partners to do that. So it is, I mean, that's the way government works. It works at multi levels. But we are going to see a dramatic increase over the next 3 or 4 years of charging stations, just like, even more so than what we saw in the past 3 or 4 years.
This is just a comment, really. I have one son, Fairfax, Virginia, northern part of the state. Mm-hmm.
We go to Centerville, so we know where Fairfax is.
Okay, right. Centerville is a suburb of Fairfax. But anyway, that's beside the point. He has a new Ford Lightning pickup with a standard battery in it, because he couldn't get the extended battery at the time. He's hoping that eventually Ford will make available an extended range battery for that particular pickup and give him a good deal price-wise on it. But when he comes down here about every month or so to visit me, help me clean my house out, he has all the appropriate charging stations in the app in his pickup. So he knows where to stop and how long he can afford to spend at that particular charging station, how much range is going to give him later. He's a happy customer of Ford at the moment.
Yeah. The Ford.
So I am, next week or so, some electrical contractor is supposed to give me a call to come out and look at my house and see around figures what it will cost me to add a circuit and a plug for resale values later on. So I'm next week or so, I hopefully will see somebody out there at my house with a calculator and his boss's best words in his mind. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's a great story. And yes, many new EVs now, particularly those that have embedded navigation and charger finder systems, do what your son's truck does. The Lightning is a great truck. My Rivian does the same thing. Teslas do the same thing. So I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done on the electronics, just the customer-facing electronics, to provide a smoother experience in terms of putting in the plug for the charging station. Yes, I think that's a good thing. It is something that's a benefit to someone who would come and buy the house. When I had mine done about 6 years ago, I guess 6 years ago, I had a pretty short run. It cost me like $500 to get it done, but it really depends upon how far the plug is from the panel, because it's a very big wire that is there, and the longer that wire, the longer the run, the bigger the wire has to be. So that really is a big part of what determines that. Lots of copper, that's right.
Since EVs are putting gas stations out of business, what are the gas companies doing about putting charging stations in at the gas stations?
Some of them are doing it. Some of them are not. Sheetz is doing it. There's up in the Mid-Atlantic area, the Royal Farms gas chain has a lot of charging stations. So there are some out there. Some are embracing it more quickly than others. They're all trying to figure out how to make a buck, make as much as they can selling gas, and figure out what to do with this. And the thing is that, you look at the experience is a little different, because when you stop, I mean, at least for the foreseeable future, it's going to be 15 to 30 minutes. Well, okay, so what's the environment that you're charging in? What amenities can be offered? What might people buy? So I think we're going to see some changes in the business models for some of these places.
One of the things he hasn't said is, it's usually like in a Walmart parking lot, and they give you and it's at the farthest point from the store, because they don't want people going into the store parking in front of those chargers. Nobody parks over here to go to the store. So when he says it takes 15, 20 minutes for us to take our turns going to the bathroom and walking the dogs, part of it is because I'm walking across the entire Walmart parking lot. And depending, Walmart can't standardize where they put their bathrooms.
Yeah.
One of the other things that have come up is that the gas taxes pay for the roads. And, you know, with his EV, they're not going to have to be, the taxes. So what's going to happen?
Well, so today, when we register our EVs, we actually pay a fee that replaces the lost revenue from the gas tax. And we were actually a part of a system that was it was a multi-state survey that trying to come up with a good plan for all the states up and down the East Coast. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a movement toward a per mile tax that's likely to be assessed at registration, at re-registration each year, rather than doing it as a part of the gas purchase.
Now, my comment about that is again a problem for lower socioeconomic people. Because I have to, so when you re-register your car, you have to pay the property tax, and we pay, in essence, our gas tax for the year right then. So if you have someone that's struggling to pay and then has to turn around and pay, because it's one thing to go, I've got $5 in my pocket and I can go buy gasoline and that pays gas tax. But if I'm paying that 100% of that gas tax at one time for lower socioeconomic people, that is a problem. I have one more comment. No one's asked what happens when the hurricane comes.
What happens when the hurricane comes?
You have to have electricity to pump gasoline at your gas station. I can tell you for a fact, you can't pump gasoline without electricity. So saying, what am I going to do? Well, if you don't have your truck full or your car full with gasoline, you're not going to get any once the hurricane comes. And if you don't have your battery full, you're not going to get any more power either.
Except that, since we have solar with battery storage, we can continue to make as much power as we want as long as the sun comes out. Now when Florence came through and it was cloudy for 4 days, that was a bit of a problem. Okay, but generally speaking, you're actually you might be in a little better situation with an electric car than you would be with a gas car. Besides, we don't have to depend upon that truck to come from what, and what happened when those pipelines broke not too long ago? You were having problems getting gas. Electricity shows up on those wires in your house.
Now showing that the EV can actually feed into the house.
Yes.
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 So if you've got those emergency things that you need in your freezer and things,
Yeah.
you can still keep those with your vehicle. You can't do that with gas.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much. This has
We
been
got
wonderful.
one more question up here.
One more question. Just one more?
And then we have to go rescue the dog who's been sitting in his crate. So,
Does anybody make an extra battery pack so you have extra range when you're going someplace?
well, so that's an interesting question. There are things that I have seen. If you have something like a pickup truck, you can actually put things in the back of the pickup truck and carry a stack of batteries. There's actually a travel trailer manufacturer, or a couple of them, that are saying that hey, we're going to put batteries in the trailer, and you can use those for camping. And by the way, you can also charge your EV off of that as well. There's one that looks really promising that says it's not only does it have batteries in it, but it also is going to have electric motors to push your truck to push along, so that there won't be a penalty in towing it. The only catch is that costs like $150,000 for that trailer. So when it comes out in 5 years. So
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I learned a lot. I learned a H of a lot, but
okay, all right.
You know what? I'm surprised I could get both heads in.
Well, and speaking of hurricanes and of solar power, there's a couple of things that are going to be coming up in the future. Well, first of all, let me make my pitch for Carolina Nature Coalition. If you enjoyed what we were doing here, then please donate, and you can donate online. Or if you're here, you can donate in the box over by the food. The things that are coming up, on April 20th, there's a Solar Power 101 at
Carteret Community College. If you hear that there's some leaflets over there, and please pick them up. Carolina Nature Coalition will send out some information on that. Our next thing, we might have something here in Craven County at the Fun Day, Festival of Fun, which is on April 15th, and it's going to be in Union Point Park. And we will definitely be for Earth Day on the 22nd at Martin Marietta Park here in New Bern. We will have tabling there, and we will have fun. Our next presentation, this is in April. On May, we are expecting to have a presentation on Native Americans in Craven County and the land use here from Native Americans. In June, we're hoping to have a program on bats. We're going to have a bat expert, all right? And this summer, we will have excursions to, I usually say Little Washington, but we'll say the original Washington, to the estuarium and to the Underground Railroad Museum with lunch in between. So if you enjoy what we're doing, please support us. And thank you.